marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me.
Hi, my name is Amber Bruner, and I'm one of the school psychologists in Jessamine County Schools. And we're going to talk a little today about trauma, and not only just about what is trauma, but also how it impacts us and impacts the kids, as well as some tips and tools to support those kiddos in dealing with and actually becoming more resilient, even given some of the life circumstances that have happened. And so, as we talk about this topic today, I want to start out by saying at any point that you need to take a time out for some self-care, please do. The topic, just the word trauma, can sometimes be what we call triggering to people. And I want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. So as you listen to this recording at any time that you feel like you just need to stop and push pause, please do so. And then just pick back up when you're ready. If you need to, take some deep breaths, go outside for a minute, just take a break and come back. That is fine to do. I not only give you permission to do that, I encourage you to do that as through our time together. So we're going to start out and we're going to watch a video that talks to us about what are adverse childhood experiences, okay? We often refer to adverse childhood experiences as ACEs. As you're watching this video, I want you to think about what are the ACEs? What does the video say the ACEs are? And then what is the impact of having adverse childhood experiences for a person, both in the short term and the long term? So let's watch this video together.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, and as we watch that video together, let's recap that we are looking at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and those ACEs are grouped into 3 different categories. So we have the category of abuse, which can be physical, emotional, or sexual. We have the category of neglect, which is both physical neglect and emotional neglect. And recently, as we've seen the rise in technology use, especially from adults, we start to see that some of that emotional neglect can be from just disengagement, just adults being in the same room but not engaging with the kids that are around them. And then household dysfunction can look like mental illness, particularly if the mother has a mental illness, the mother treated violently or domestic violence in the home, divorce, incarcerated relatives, someone in jail or prison, and any type of substance abuse. In our community, especially, we're seeing a rise in overdoses, and that can be extremely aversive for kiddos who know someone that has occurred in their life. And so, as we think about those ACEs and what we heard from the video, not only are there the 10 that they originally started with in this study, but we also learned that ACEs are really common. So 2 in 3 of respondents had at least one ACE. And consider again that that was in a very middle class working setting. And so if you think about some of our communities that have low income or poverty, those number of ACEs often increase even more. But ACEs are very common. ACEs also have some real heavy impact, not only to the risk that someone may take, but also to the actual physical health of people who are impacted by those adverse childhood experiences. And so they mentioned that if your ACE score is 4, you could be 2 times as likely to have cancer or heart disease. If your ACE score is 5, 8 times as likely to be at risk for alcoholism. An ACE score of 6, potential of 20 years less life expectancy. And so what we can see is that the things that happen to us in childhood and the things that are happening to our kids in their childhood can have a drastic, lifelong impact for them. The good news that we'll talk about in a bit is that there are things that we can do to create buffers and to create supports to help our kids be resilient and help the impact of that adverse childhood experiences that they may have faced already be less detrimental and help them to grow more through these experiences. So we'll talk about those together in a little bit. First, let's look again at some of those impacts that ACEs can have. And again, with the ACEs study, the more adverse childhood experiences experienced by an individual, the more risk there is for potential behavior, like at-risk behavior, as well as physical and mental health disease and concern. And so again, it's common, and again, it has lasting impact. So right now, I want you to think about your upbringing when you were a child, and think through some of those questions that they ask in terms of those adverse childhood experiences. And I want to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on what might your score be. So look at those 10 and think for a minute, how many of those are true for you? And now I want you to think for a minute about one of your children. And if you currently don't have children, a child that's close to you. And I want you to think about what would their ACE score be currently? So again, the goal of kind of reflecting and thinking about what our ACE score might be and what the children in our care that we care for might be is to help us to see that those ACEs can have a significant impact. So reflect on a couple of things for me. First thing I want you to do is jot down on a piece of paper, or if you're watching this with someone, push pause and talk and think about what is something that you have learned about ACEs. Go ahead and I'll give you about 2 minutes. Okay, if you haven't finished writing or you haven't finished talking, that's okay. Just push pause, and when you get finished, come back. If you have, I want you to say aloud with me what ACEs are. So if you'll just say adverse childhood experiences. Okay, let's say that together. Adverse childhood experiences. So when we think about those adversity that are faced in childhood, we recognize that 1 in 4 children have experienced trauma. And so, how do those adverse childhood experiences relate to or become traumatic for a kid? Trauma is any experience that threatens an individual's life and or their sense of safety. And so in that definition, one of the things that we have to remember is that it is an experience that the child perceives threatens their life or their sense of safety or the life of someone very close to them. And so when we think about that, there can be a scenario, an adversity in childhood. Let's take divorce, for example. Where one child in the home may not feel like that anybody's life around them is threatened to the point where that person may die or be taken away permanently, or their sense of safety that they still know both parents love them and care for them and are going to work together to support them. Whereas another child, it may be highly devastating for that kid to the point where they feel like, I'm not going to see that person again. Or if that person is not around, then I am not safe in any way. When it is that type of adverse experience, that's when it becomes traumatic for a child. Trauma can be direct, so it can be something like that's directly experienced by the person. It can be indirect, so someone close to the child's life is potentially in danger. That can look like a parent who is on drugs or a parent who is struggling with alcoholism. That can also look like a watching a one parent physically hurt another parent or one of their siblings in a way that they potentially feel like that somebody could be an individual's life could be at danger. It can also be what we call secondary traumatic stress. And so trauma can be secondary in that, let's say you have a situation where lots of people are talking about something that occurred outside of that current situation. Perhaps there was somebody in the neighborhood who was very close to them. Maybe an uncle has come over and they said, yeah, he overdosed yesterday. And that for that child, they have felt like that uncle is very close to them and that their life is in danger. And that can be very traumatic for them to hear about that experience. In the same way, secondary trauma can come from what currently our world and our culture of things being seen and heard that create a sense of fear or uncertainty for a child can be considered a trauma. So, in our world together now, working through a pandemic, we know that that is what we call a collective trauma, meaning that we are all experiencing some form of uncertainty around our safety and the safety of others and the health of others. And so, collectively now, you can kind of see the impact, where you can definitely see the impact of all of us working through a pandemic together. But for kids in particular, thinking about some of those adversities that they may face, when those become to the point where they're not just adversive, but they create a sense of just overwhelming toxic stress, where the child really is not able to cope and their life or the life of someone close to them feels very threatened, that is when we define that as trauma. Trauma refers to both our physiological and our psychological responses and adaptations when we experience real adversity. And so, in our bodies, I want to show you these pictures. This is a picture on the left of a healthy brain, okay? And these are 4-year-old brains. The picture on the right is a PET scan of the brain of a Romanian orphan. So a child who was highly neglected, okay, since being a little baby. And what you can see here is that the brains look very different. So if you look where it says temporal lobes in the middle and you look to the bottom, that area there that is very red in this brain, but is not as lit up in this brain, is what we call the amygdala. And that's the part of our brain that helps keep us safe. It's our fight, flight, freeze response center. It's the part of your brain that when you see a dog coming at you barking, that makes you jump and either stop or run or try to go after the dog. It's the part of the brain that if you're in a forest and there's a bear, that's going to be scared. It's the part of the brain that causes our heart to beat really fast whenever we think we might hit the car in front of us driving and we slam on our brakes. Okay? That part of our brain is so important because it keeps us alive. But what you can see in the brain of the child that is highly neglected is that it is on high alert. And when our amygdala is on high alert, what it doesn't allow is for us to create these pathways to other areas of our brain that are parts of our brain that help us to know when we can slow down and when we truly need to be concerned. Because we're living in this state that is just toxic stress, that the stress is overwhelming the brain's ability to cope or to be able to develop in a healthy way. Over here, you can see that yes, that amygdala is lit up, but that pathways have been created to other areas of the brain. So when we look kind of in the middle of the brain, this is our emotional regulation center, as well as some of our filing center. And so when we think about having emotions that say, you're a safe person, I can file that away that when I'm with this particular person, I know that I'm safe. When I'm doing this particular activity, I know that that brings me joy. And so we start to be able to file correctly. What you can see in the brain of a child who's neglected is that they really don't have a filing system. And when they do, it's fairly scattered. It's just kind of hit or miss here or there. Okay. The other thing you see in the brain of a healthy child is a very highly developed frontal lobe. And this is the part of our brain that we call the thinking brain. So this is the area that really helps us to make good decisions, to help us to have impulse control, to help us choose not to take those risks that we know are detrimental to our health or to the safety of our children or to the safety of ourselves. And so it is the part that thinks for us. It's the thinking brain. What you can see in the child who's been neglected is that there are some areas that have been reached, but they're few and far between and they're not very developed. And so as we face new experiences in life, this child is highly sensitive to thinking, this is also stressful. I'm on high alert, high alert, high alert. Whereas the child who has a healthy developed brain has these pathways that allow them to know when I need to alert because it's a true risk. And when I'm able to handle the stress coming at me, it's tolerable for me. And I'm able to buffer it with all the emotions that I know are good, all the situations that have been safe for me, and then be able to go to the thinking part of the brain that's going to help me to make those good decisions based on what is the stressor and what is my reality and my known of what is safe. When we have a healthy brain, our brain has more what we call superhighways, ways that we can access that information really quickly and make good decisions. When we have been through trauma and we've experienced a lot of adversity and our brain is overwhelmed and that stress is not tolerable, but it's very toxic to us, you can see that that ability is really lessened for that brain. But here's the good news. The good news is that we can rewire these brains. As we learn more and more about our brain chemistry, and as we learn more and more about how we respond to how we face different situations, and how we can all become buffers for those around us who have experienced trauma, we realize that we can take this brain and start developing pathways that look more and more like this brain. In other words, this 4-year-old doesn't always have to stay in this constant state of arousal and stress. This 4-year-old can grow and develop to be a person who can start to decrease that cortisol coming to the body, decrease those hormones that are telling the body to activate all the time and are impacting our heart and are leading us to have cancer and other diseases, and say, stop, I'm good, I can calm. So let's look at it this way. A perceived threat comes at us. Our alarm center, that amygdala, is activated. This is called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Basically what that means is there's hormones that are released in our body that tell us to fight or flight or freeze, that protect us from harm. Those get filed in what's called the hippocampus, but that filing center, remember, is not well developed, and so it becomes very disorganized. So then our thinking center, or that front part of our brain, never really registers. It goes offline and it doesn't help us to make the right decision. So when there's no feedback to turn off that alarm, the alarm just keeps going. It stays activated. And we get in this cycle where we're trying, but nothing is there to turn off the alarm. So just like I said earlier, we can become the buffer. Our goal and our point of learning about what does adverse childhood experiences do and how does trauma impact us and our brain and our body is to also help us to understand that we have purpose in being able to help support each other, in being able to turn off that alarm. Okay? None of us want to hear our alarm in the morning and try to turn it off and it wouldn't go off. We want to be able to have the strategies we need to be able to turn off that alarm. And so let's talk a little bit about what could those tools be in your toolbox. When we think about strategies to support and help those that have been impacted by trauma, we think about them in three categories. When we think about wanting people to feel very safe, to feel like they have worth, to understand their worth as a human being, and to be able to take care of ourselves and be aware of how we're currently doing, to know how we need to regulate, how we need to calm down, what we need to do in order to best help those around us. Okay? And so we know that we can't help our kids and we can't help others if we're not first making sure that we're okay and we're in a state where we can support other people. So let's talk about safety a little bit. What I want you to do is to either take out a piece of paper or take out your phone in the notes section, or if you're with somebody, have a conversation with them. But I want you to write down 2 or 3 people that care about your child or care about the children that you are caring for. Okay? And the 2 to 3 people that you would call if you ever had a need or that you trust with your children. Okay? I want you to include their phone number and their address. And if you don't have that, I encourage you to find that. And I need you to keep that in a central location, maybe on your fridge, and talk with your child about where that would be or who mommy or daddy trust that if anything was to ever happen, that they could call these people. Okay? Now, when you're thinking about who those people are, there's a few things that you have to be able to say are true for them. That they have a stable living arrangement, that they have reliable transportation. It doesn't necessarily have to be their own vehicle, just a way that they can get to your children if needed or to you. That they're sober and are currently not using drugs of any kind. That they can be reached most hours of the day, which means that they have a reliable phone service. Doesn't matter what that service is, but do not choose people who you feel like don't have minutes most of the time. Choose those people who you're able to get in contact with. I'm going to give you just a minute, and then if you need more time, you can push pause and then start watching this again. Okay, the second thing we can do to help support our children and help support ourselves if we've experienced trauma or our children have experienced those adversities is to provide what we call safety messages. And safety messages are grounded in the fact that we want to help kids understand that we're going to look at them through the lens of what has happened to you, and you've been through things, you've experienced things that have impacted the way you think and feel versus what's wrong with you. So if we have children and they're having different behaviors that are really kind of frustrating for us, rather than saying, "What is wrong with you?" we're going to look through a lens of, "I wonder what's happened to you. What has happened to you to create that behavior or have you exhibit that behavior at this time?" As we know, remember with the brain, children who've experienced trauma do not have those healthy pathways where the emotions and the good memories are positive and that they're able to be stored well to create those pathways to that part of the brain that's really thinking clearly. And so often what we see in children who've experienced trauma is it's difficult for them to attach to others and also difficult for them to be able to feel any sense of worth or safety with people that they're with or even within themselves. And so safety messages are just messages that we explain you have to be truthful, you have to be honest and be supportive, but that, hey, we hear you and we're listening to you, and that we want to make sure that you know that you are safe and that your worth is super important. And so, safety messages are partnership messages, things like, I'm here to support you, we're going to work together. Normalizing messages, meaning that whatever the child is facing, that you can empathize in some way with them, and you can also help them to know that that feeling is not totally out of the box or totally out of the blue. And so things like, I see that you're not wanting to do your work right now, or I see that you're upset right now. Sometimes it's tough to do things we don't want to do. How can I help you? So just coming down to where they're at emotionally, remember they're not in that thinking part of their brain. So coming to where they are, fight, flight, freeze state, that reaction state, and helping them to say, hey, I get it. Like I've been there too. Or yeah, it is tough to do things you don't want to do. How can I help you? Another way to support and provide a safety message is to say, how can I help you? Just ask directly, what's going on? What do you need? And the fourth way is just to truly empathize with the situation and with how the child is feeling. Being able to say, I see that you are upset. I understand what it feels like to be hurt. I understand what it feels like to be sad. And giving examples and really helping them to get to know you too in a very age appropriate way, in a way not oversharing your own wounds or hurts, but is helping them to cope and to see that, hey, it is safe to have feelings, and these adults in my life are going to help me to have these feelings in a positive, or recreate them in a positive way. A few things with safety messages: we never want to lie to kids, and so you can't say things like, no one will ever hurt you again, because the reality of life is that's a statement that we can't guarantee. While we would love to, and as a mom, I would love to be able to say that to my children, my reality is I just have to pray and trust that they're going to be okay, but I don't know that no one will ever hurt them again. Or say, if let's say mom is currently using in some way, and to say, I promise that mommy won't do drugs again. If that's not true, or that's not something that you know is a certain, then that's not something that would help your child feel safe or help the children that you care for feel safe. Saying things like nothing bad will ever happen to you, that's a don't do that, or keep your thoughts and feelings to yourself, or just pull up your bootstraps or suck it up. Those messages create what's called shame, and they make the child feel like I should just be able to handle this. When the reality of toxic stress and the reality of those adverse experiences, our brains aren't fit to handle that without strong adult buffers to support us. You can say things like, I will work hard to keep you safe in my home, or I will do my best to get you to a safe place, or I will always do my best to help you, or I'm a safe person to talk to. I'm always going to respect your thoughts and feelings. Even if I don't agree, I'm going to respect what you have to say. So things like that provide such a safety message for kids. Remember, we're looking at kids now not as what is wrong with you, but what has happened to you, and understanding that they've been through things and they need us to come alongside and help them to feel safe. Another strategy we can do to help children feel safe is what we call repack the suitcase. And so if you think about some of the situations that maybe you've been through, or some of the situations that children that you know have been through, and it can be kind of messy. Maybe they had a parent leave, and then another parent was using drugs, Or maybe they had a situation where they were placed in foster care and that family was not as helpful to them. Or maybe they've had situations where lots of different people in their home have come in and out of the home, and some have physically abused them or neglected them in some way. We end up just having kind of this messy room where nothing is really well packed. And so, to help our children feel safe again, we can start to what we call repack that suitcase, taking those experiences and naming them for what they are, but then allowing the child to know none of that was on you. You are a strong person, and I hate that you've been through this, but I trust that we can get through it together. It's helping them repack that memory as something that's not fully negative, but also as something that they can now see as I can be resilient through. I can, you can help support me through. Helping children to see that what has occurred is not their fault, helping them to see that those experiences that perhaps adults partake in are not, they don't have to carry that load. So if you think about carrying kind of the picture on the left of all those clothes and trying to pick them up and carry them somewhere, it's a lot. It's really heavy. And our kids who are carrying around these real messy suitcases with clothes hanging out of them, and by clothes, I mean all these experiences that are tough, it's pretty heavy for them. And so repacking it for them just means being able to help them to see their worth even through the experiences that they've been in. A few others ideas about safety. Again, just reassuring your child that he or she is not responsible. Children often blame themselves. They feel a lot of shame for events that are going on around them, even those that are completely out of their control. Allowing them to know, like, this is not your fault. And yes, there are things that I may have to work on, or the situation is not a good situation, but that they are worthy and that they have hope and that they have a future. Allow your child to express how they're feeling, either verbally or just through playing with you. That's very normal to handling traumatic events. I think about like my dad recently passed away. And initially, like I couldn't really verbalize how I was feeling, but just having my mom with me and just kind of being together, I was able to start just go, okay, she's safe. I can really talk about how I'm feeling after this traumatic experience for me. Maintaining regular home and school routines to support your kid is a huge step in recovering and becoming resilient after traumatic events. It is so important to have routines and consistency, especially if they're school age, going to school every day. If they're still young kiddos, being able to have that routine in your household, for them to know what's coming next. It is absolutely crucial in rewiring that brain and helping them to feel safe and that they have some control in a very uncontrollable world. So, worth. Building worth in our kids, developing worth statements for our kids. If you've ever seen the movie The Help, you'll understand this quote. You was kind, you was smart, you was important. And in that movie, the lady that was caring for the child's mother was pretty derogatory towards her, always commenting on her weight and commenting on how she was acting. And the lady that was caring for her often would tell her these three things. You was kind, you was smart, you was important. It is crucial for our kids to know that we love them and we care for them and we see them beyond the circumstances that they are in. And so when kids have experienced trauma, they often internalize that and think that it's their fault or because of something they've done or said, or even if they do not think that it's their fault, they kind of on a subconscious level internalize that guilt and that shame that these situations are happening in their world. And so developing that worth statement for your children or the kids that you care for, and also developing that worth statement for you and allowing yourself to know that there is purpose in your world and that you have worth as well. Remember, with worth, it's the idea of supporting the children's feelings. And in doing that, you have to be patient. There's no correct timetable for healing. So you may have a child who's really doing well and seems like they're recovering nicely after some type of an incident or a traumatic event, or just able to handle the circumstances in their world. And you may have another child that takes longer to recover, and that is okay. Some recover quickly, other children recover more slowly. Our role is to help them to still feel a sense of worth no matter where they're at on that spectrum, and also continue to feel safe. One of the things that we don't want to do is make sure they say things like, just get over it, just be done, it's over now, I had to go through all this was hard for me when I was a kid. All of those things really create these guilty or bad feelings, and we want to make sure that we're changing that narrative for them, changing that focus for them so that they have worth and they have purpose. The other thing we're going to talk about is just being self-aware. And we think about that about the ABCs of self-care. Okay. We know that you have to nourish yourself to flourish with your children and others in your life. In order to flourish, you have to recognize when you are stressed. We do so by making sure that we have a check-in with ourselves daily. Think about using your phone and setting an alarm daily. When the alarm goes off, you just check in. Are you stressed? If you are, stop and deal with it. Take some deep breaths, call somebody you trust. It's so important to be aware of how we're feeling and where we're at. Balance is also important. When life is super stressful, it's incredibly tough. But the first step is to think when you are less stressed about things that you enjoy, you can provide good, healthy options, right? So, what do you enjoy doing? What types of things in life are not stressful for you but bring joy and relaxation? Is it to read or to work out or to go for a walk or just to go outside? Choose a time where you can create balance in order to do these things. Again, we often don't know when we're out of balance unless we take time to stop and be aware of where we currently are. So I strongly encourage you to pull out your phone and set an alarm and try to, when that alarm goes off each day, just do a little self-check. If you need to be more balanced at that time, to give yourself permission to take care of yourself. We are not going to be able to flourish with our kids until we've nourished who we are. And connection, who are your people? Who can you talk to that brings positive to your world? Who can you talk to that helps you to make decisions that are positive and uplifting and get you further towards your goals in life? Connect with those people, know those people, and don't let go of those people. So we've talked about creating a sense of safety, and some tools in our toolbox for doing that are creating those safety messages, repacking that suitcase, and helping kids not to feel any sense of shame or guilt for what's occurring around them. Providing worth statements and building that sense of worth in our children, and also taking care of ourselves, being aware, having balance, and staying connected to others. One thing when we talk about being regulated or being in balance is this idea of mindfulness and this idea of self-regulation. These 4 strategies are strategies that we teach at an early age, even 3, 4, and 5 years old, and that are also very helpful. Even the Marines and the Navy SEALs use that 5-finger breathing and the box breathing technique. So my thought is if they can do that in those heightened states of being in the military and in combat, they should be able to help us too in our worlds that we're living in. And so belly breaths are just holding on to putting your hand on your stomach and just taking deep breaths in where you can feel your stomach go in and out. Shark breathing is making a shark fin. And as you come up out of the water, you take a breath. And as you come down into the water, you breathe out that breath. 5-finger breathing is holding up one hand, tracing that hand with your other finger, going up one side of the finger, breathing in, going down that same or the opposite side of that finger, breathing out, and doing that 5 times in a row. Box breathing is where you go up and make a box. So you go up one side, breathe in, go across one side, breathe out, go down one side, breathe in, and go across one side, breathe out. all of these are great strategies to help us to stay mindful. I want to talk just for a minute as we close about some good ideas about helping us to stay self-aware and balanced, especially through this time of a pandemic, and creating strength for all of us. Because now not only do we have a lot of the basic stressors of life, but we also have this collective trauma that we're all facing, and we all need strategy to help support us to heal and to be connected people. So protect your mental health with sleep, with hydration, exercise, and meditation. One of the biggest there is just make sure that you're drinking a lot of water. I know it sounds kind of silly, but the more hydrated we are, the better we're going to feel and the better our body is going to be able to help us to make good choices. Know how you're feeling, have that vocabulary to express how you're feeling. Become curious instead of furious with people, meaning that there is a whole lot going on in our media right now, and it can be really quick to just shout out something or get upset about something. Instead, kind of be curious, that same mindset of what's happened to them or what's going on in their world for them to feel that way. Become committed to change and personal growth. Know your strengths. Learn how to say no. It is okay to have a balance in your life where you can speak to your needs and also say no to things that are not healthy in any way for you. Letting go of your mistakes, and then practicing that sense of gratitude, really thanking each day. This is a great strategy for kids, especially kids who've experienced trauma, is just to find the good, see the good, and be able to name that good. And then being able, like we talked about before, finding that balance and being able to unplug and restore. So today we've learned a lot about adverse childhood experiences. We've learned that those experiences can have lasting impact both physically as well as in our mental health. We've also learned that as we experience those things and continue to experience adversity in life, when that stress becomes incredibly toxic versus tolerable, and we have the perception that there is life lost or a real heightened sense that there's going to be life lost, then that is when we consider that trauma. We've learned that that trauma can be direct or indirect or also secondary for an individual. And then we've learned we have strategy to help support and rewire our brain to better the outcome for both ourselves as well as the kids that we care for and care about. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I encourage you to continue to reflect on this topic and continue to reflect on what am I currently doing that is helpful to those around me to become more resilient, to grow and to be positive, and what are the things that I need to change to help foster that resiliency and to help foster that growth instead of perhaps contributing to more toxic stress for those around me. So thanks again for joining me today.